My name is Andy Engel, and I'm senior programmer at Reimagine. Welcome to the kickoff session for Reimagine's series, Addiction, Harmful Habits, and Healing. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgender male. For folks who may have trouble seeing, I've got glasses. I've got a bright orange background behind me, some sunshine coming to my right. Reimagine is a nonprofit that's catalyzing a unique and powerful community, people of different backgrounds, ages, races, and faiths, people of no faith, all coming together in the hopes of healing ourselves and the world. We specifically support each other in facing adversity, loss, mortality, and transforming life's biggest challenges into meaningful action and growth. Reimagine provides resources, support groups, and events like this one today. Most of them are free and accessible to the public. And this is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those of you who already made a tax-deductible donation when you registered for this program, thank you for that. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hardest parts into purpose and action. We've been exploring topics, different aspects of loss, grief, and struggle, and we've been doing this all through the lens of post-traumatic growth. Previous series have focused on aging, money, career, climate change, but arguably, addiction may be the adversity with the most stigma and shame and taboo that's attached to it. And we're living in a moment right now that feels so heavy with collective grief, war, refugees, the crumbling of democracy. I can tell you personally that I've reverted to some of my harmful habits. So I hope you'll register for the remaining two events in this series. We're going to explore the root causes of harmful habits, negative behavior patterns, and addictions. What kind of losses do people with addictions and their loved ones experience? Is there an experience of grief that is unique to those who struggle with addiction? How can we create more space to process the collective grief of the opioid epidemic and other related public health crises? What are the tools and resources that can lead to transformation and lasting change? And what role does creativity and spirituality play in our healing and recovery? So please register for those two remaining events. We're interested in knowing where all of you are. If you haven't done so, please put that in the chat. There's a very helpful map. It's called native-land.ca. And for North America, you can check out locations of Indigenous people in your area. For example, I'm in Lenapehoking, where a large city called New York is located on occupied land. And now, a few Zoom bits of housekeeping. You can click on the CC icon to get a live transcript of what's being said, and you can save the chat, which I hope you'll pepper, by clicking on the three dots in the chat box. Feel free to send me or my colleague Nicole a note in the chat if you have any technical issues. We might be able to help you. And everyone who registered for this workshop will get a follow-up email with the recording. Okay. I am so honored to have four experts here with us today to explore the grief and the growth that they experienced in their struggles with addiction, whether it's their own personal struggle or the addiction of a loved one. They are all accomplished authors of recently published books, but they all come from diverse fields. Today, we have renowned professor of psychology, Judy Grisel, who offers surprising ways to combat today's addiction epidemic. Her best-selling book is Never Enough: The Neuroscience and Experience of Addiction. We have Laura Cathcart Robbins, host of the podcast, The Only One in the Room. Hello, Laura, who will share a bit about her journey to sobriety and self-love amidst privilege and racism. Her new book is Stash, My Life in Hiding. We have poet and memoirist Jane Wong. Her book, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, is an honest look at the experiences of her immigrant parents, her father's gambling addiction, and her mother's love to keep the family together. And finally, we have psychiatrist Carl Fisher, who will serve as moderator. Thank you so much, Carl. His book, The Urge, is an impressive mix of personal narrative, humanities, and social science research. You can read all of our speakers' full bios using the links in the chat, and please buy their books using the links provided. Our speakers will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and afterwards we'll have about 10 to 20 minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions, start using the chat, and we'll try to get to those. Carl, I'm going to ask you briefly, before I hand the baton off to you, to share a bit about your journey to writing The Urge.
Thanks so much, Annie. And it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be part of this extremely important series. And I'm just so grateful for all of you who signed on to talk about this important topic. And I'm honored to be here with these three fantastic, courageous women who I hadn't met before, and I'm honored to meet now. So I really look forward to the conversation. I'll just share briefly, and I would love to also hear a little bit more about people's experience of addiction and the way it's contacted their lives or the lives of people around them. In my case, I usually start the story if I'm being interviewed during my time in medical school, which is when my own addiction problems developed. But I'm feeling moved today to say that it was my first contact with addiction really was in my family, because both of my parents, by their own identification, were people with alcoholism, and they struggled throughout all of my childhood. And so I had an early and intimate experience with alcohol that was also balanced by a type of mystery and subterfuge and a whole host of unsaid things about how to work with our suffering that always left me feeling like I didn't really have the whole story. And that certainly set the stage in some ways, at least for my own problems with drinking. But just to say it very briefly, and other elements might come up later, I went to medical school. I should say, by the way, my pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cishet man. And I really thought that I was on top of the world, brimming with privilege, poised to be a star. I was at Columbia University Medical School, winning academic awards and really active in propping up my own self-image and self-worth. And then I was simultaneously hiding a serious problem with alcohol, and then later prescribed stimulants, and then later cocaine. And that all came to a head after medical school in my second year of training during my psychiatric residency, also at Columbia. Despite receiving an intervention from my program, despite receiving repeated warnings from people that I trusted really well and I knew were looking out for me, I had a tremendous addictive crisis. I wound up in a manic episode, and I was psychiatrically admitted to Bellevue Hospital, affiliated with New York University, in a program that I had interviewed with just a couple of years earlier. And if I weren't white and privileged and living in the West Village at that time, that could have gone very differently for me. The NYPD had to send a SWAT team to break down my door and subdue me, but in no small part because of my privilege and my background. Yeah, I was handled relatively compassionately, and I got the option of treatment rather than punishment or just execution. And so I got the opportunity to receive treatment, and then I was in a monitored treatment program as part of being a doctor. In the beginning, I thought that was the end of my life. I thought that it was a violation of my autonomy and an insult, and I wanted treatment, and I saw that I had a problem, so why shouldn't I be allowed to just pursue it myself? And in the end, really, it showed me that I needed that help. I needed that that benign coercion in the true philosophical sense of having a hard choice. And so that was my experience. I got sober as a result of that. I identify as being a person in recovery. I identify as a person in long-term abstinence-based recovery, while also holding to the fact that that's not the answer for everybody, and it's certainly not the answer for all the patients I treat. And I wrote the book because I was interested in exploring beyond medicine or neuroscience into the culture, historical, humanistic backgrounds, cultural context, and especially the histories of racism, oppression, and structural violence that feed into our working models and our folk ideals of addiction. I've gone on a little bit here, so I'll stop there. I know all the other panelists have lots more to say on some of these issues. Andy, is there anything else you wanted to cover, or should I just start kicking it over to some of these fantastic folks?
I may have a question when we get to the official Q&A portion to kick us off, but I want to hear stories of others. So yeah, go ahead and invite folks to share.
Okay, wow. I'm realizing I didn't even think about who I would call. I don't want to call on anyone. I feel like I'm here to just facilitate with a very light touch. So I'll let the three of you think about who wants to jump in and volunteer. But I thought we could all start kind of similar to what I just said, with a slightly more extended introduction from each of us to say a little bit about how addiction has touched your life, the lives of people around you, how you make sense of addiction, and just what that was like for you, however form you want to take that. Is there anybody who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in.
Great.
First, Andy, thank you so much for including us and putting this together. It's really fantastic. Carl, I got completely lost in what you were saying. You're fascinating, and your story is really interesting. And you didn't go on too long. I wanted you to go on longer. Very excited to be on this panel with these women and with you. And my story is also one of privilege, but a different privilege, socioeconomical privilege. And my book, Stash My Life in Hiding, I say, is about where privilege, race, and addiction, it's about that intersection of the three. And I say socioeconomic privilege, not to say that I grew up with money. I actually grew up really poor. I had a mom who was on welfare and shoplifted groceries, but I went to independent schools. So the places where I played and the place where I went to school was they were very well funded places. People had a lot of money. And so that was the environment in which I grew up. It's also the world in which I married. I married into this world of privilege later on. And I was the parent association president at my kid's school. I had just been asked to join the board. I had a personal shopper. I lived in a mansion. I had nannies. I had drivers. And I had an addiction that was killing me. And it was a secret. And I was getting a divorce, and I was going to lose my kids if I didn't address it. And so I did. But after much hardship to me and my family. And my recovery is like you described. It is abstinence-based. I identify as someone in recovery. My sobriety date is August 14th, 2008. And I'm very grateful now that I know what my issue was. I know I identify as an addict, and I know that addiction was my issue. And I have a solution for it that works for me on a daily basis. And like you said, I know that's not the same solution for everybody, but for me it is. And that clarity that I don't have to wonder if I'm an addict or test out theories is really good for me too, because I don't test the theories out. I just know. And like I said, I live in Sherman Oaks, California, no longer with my two sons who were grown and out of the house. But I also live in a sober home with the man I met in treatment, who I write about in my book, Stash My Life in Hiding. So that's it for me.
You want to go, Jade, or should I?
You can go ahead, Judy. I feel like I'm always like, you go.
I'm always like that too, so we could be here all day, but I'll go. My name's Judy Grisel, and I cis, het, she, her. Now I'm a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Bucknell University in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm really grateful to be here. The more experience I get, the more I realize that who I am and my well-being is really directly related to my connections with other people. And so thank you for the opportunity to be here, Andy, and for the community that's here. I also grew up in privilege. I didn't feel like that. I grew up in suburban New Jersey. My father was an airline pilot and my mother was a nurse, and things looked pretty good. I suppose they weren't great inside, and there was addiction, deeply buried in my family, and tons of mental health struggles, probably, as I think probably every family has, or virtually every family. But things looked good until I, on a whim, at right about my 13th birthday, decided to try alcohol. And I think for many people, this is the case. It was just, what the heck? And I was kind of looking for something to shake things up a little, and found a gallon of wine at a friend's house, and we drank it. And it really changed the trajectory of my whole life. The next 10 years, I did not say no to any opportunity to escape my reality. I really, it was like a magic to me that I could so thoroughly and so quickly change my my relationship with myself and the world. And I really am like an escape queen. I love that from the beginning. And so as a result, things didn't look so good in a short order. This was in the 80s. So my sobriety date, I'm also in long-term recovery, is July 9th, 1986. I'm grateful to say beyond words. But before I got sober, I pretty much was self-destructing. I took all these things. I got kicked out of 3 schools. I became homeless. I got hepatitis C and probably barely escaped HIV because it was the 80s. And I was at that point living in South Florida and shooting cocaine. And the thing that 2 things happened for me. One was just, I don't know what to call, but just grace, some fluke. And also I was totally miserable. So I had arranged my life so that I could take as many drugs as I wanted when I wanted, and nothing was in my way. And I hated myself and my life. And so it was like the biggest rub in the world, because this is what I thought I wanted and I couldn't stand it. But I wasn't willing to get sober, and I was randomly, almost, well, more than random, I guess. I don't know if I believe in coincidence, but whatever. Somehow I had an opportunity to go to treatment, which I didn't know what treatment was in the 1980s. I thought I was going to get to a spa or something, honestly. And I thought I deserved a break because my life was a shit show. And so, yeah, I thought, yeah, take me away. Anyway, it wasn't so great. I saw the nurses' uniforms and woke up fairly abruptly. But what happened there was I was faced with the truth about myself, because there was no medicine to evade the truth. And I heard that if I wanted to live, I needed to change. And I didn't really want to change, and I didn't really want to live, but I was just like this much curious, which is one of my favorite attributes about myself. And so they said I had a disease, and I thought, if I have a disease, diseases can be cured. I'm going to fix it, and then I'll be able to use without self-destructing. So it probably makes sense to other people like me, but despite the fact that my record was so horrendous and I was really immature and incapacitated in lots of ways, I was very determined. And so I thought, I'm going to stay sober for 7 years. During that time, I'll cure it. I'm going to get my doctorate in neuroscience. And as I said, it took me 7 years to get my undergraduate ultimately, and then 7 years in graduate school. So it was a little bit of a long haul, but 7 years came and went, and that first 7 of recovery, and my life was a million times better. So then I'm a basic scientist. I'm interested in finding, what's wrong with my brain and other people like me that leads to this kind of self-destruction. And I have not solved that problem. I wrote the book Never Enough, in part out of frustration for not being able to solve it, because, we're dying everywhere, right under our noses, right in plain sight, right around the corner. And there's a lot we understand that helped me, by understanding the science. And so what I know is that the more I feed the hunger, the bigger it gets. And so it's like a dead end, because I cannot escape myself. But I can be free, and that takes a lot of footwork and a lot of showing up. And so I'm still learning to do that, and I'm grateful to be here. Thanks.
Wow. I feel like I'm still sitting in all that you all just said, Laura and Judy and Carl. I feel like I need a moment before I even introduce myself. Just thank you. And I'm so excited to be here, and so grateful. And thank you, Andy, for inviting all of us. My name is Jane. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a Chinese American woman wearing a big red sweater and purple earrings that my lovely friends made for me with a rat on it, because I'm the year of the rat in the zodiac. I am a poet primarily, but I just wrote a memoir. I kind of am still reeling from how vulnerable it is to, share your life experiences to the larger public. So I'm just like amazed that we're all here together and just sharing with such deep vulnerability and realness. I grew up in a Chinese American takeout restaurant on the Jersey Shore, so yay Jersey. I grew up in a family that was deeply complicated. My mother actually was arranged to marry my father when she was 19 and came to the US completely not knowing what she was kind of getting into. And my father was already in the US. And my father, really, truly, this is his story, but also our story in thinking about addiction, a type of addiction that's not often spoken about, which is, compulsive gambling and gambling addiction. And he also, suffered from alcoholism in the casino, especially as well. And so my story really looks at kind of the ways in which particularly immigrant communities, low-income communities, are targeted specifically to go to the casinos. Oftentimes, if you're in a Chinatown, and we would go to New York City's Chinatown often, the casino buses pick up from certain neighborhoods. And there are particular casinos that also have themes that are specific. Even if you look at the slot machines, they are very kind of Chinese themed or Asian themed in order, again, to target certain communities. And so I think when I was growing up, I really didn't understand what was drawing my father constantly to the casino. We owned a restaurant, and he would disappear. He was the head chef. He would disappear for 2 weeks, and we didn't know we knew where he was, but we didn't know which casino he was in. And it was really difficult for my mother, I think, also in trying to hold the family together, hold the business together. And in many ways, I think that, I wonder still sometimes that, if there were more people talking about, what was happening in their family, specifically with gambling addiction, if there would be more opportunities for my father to get help or to, you know, especially with the language barrier, it's such a challenge in thinking about how to talk about something that is oftentimes in my community, in my Chinese American community, oftentimes very shameful. And so what's been really powerful, I think, as my memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, which is also Bruce Springsteen line from his song Atlantic City, has been really powerful since the book has come out, because so many people, especially from Asian American communities, have come up to me and shared their own stories. Again, something that we don't really talk about much. And so I'm just really grateful to be here to share a little bit of that. And ultimately, the deaths that occurred for my father led to the closing of our restaurant and leaving our family, and a multitude of other things that deeply affected me as an adult as well. And so I think about this all the time, just this constant relation, you know, this desire to go to the casino, as also this attempt at the failed American dream, like this desire, right, to make it big, or to make something of yourself. But ultimately it's destroying, you know, himself and also his family. And so yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here. And I'm just it's a very vulnerable thing to talk about, especially since I know that my father is not necessarily in recovery. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to more conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being vulnerable. I know it's hard, and I really am appreciative of, like I was saying before our call, I was really appreciative of you writing about a problematic gambling or gambling addiction, because there isn't a lot of work out there, and it's really important. I say to patients often that gambling addiction has the highest suicide rate of all the addictions. So it might look on the outside like it's not as dangerous, but it really is profound. So again, thank you all for being here. I want to say to the audience, it would be wonderful to hear from you. So please, please, please think of questions. Like Andy said at the beginning, drop questions in the chat. I feel like we could be talking here. We could have a whole seminar. We could have a whole afternoon, like a conference, to just bring up and expand upon some of these themes and threads that have just been touched upon. But we have these fantastic writers here, and we're all here because we've written books. And so I was hoping maybe as a way of connecting the content of the addiction and the content of Reimagine, which Andy articulated so well, which I heard, I may butcher the way that it's nicely written up, but what I heard is supporting each other through suffering. At times of unimaginable suffering and grief and pain, how do we hold and support each other? And I'm so grateful for the opportunities to meet in this way. And I'm grateful for people who have written beautiful, heartfelt, honest books about addiction. They're crucial to my own recovery process. So I'm really glad to be here too. So I was hoping to ask everyone, maybe we could connect the content of the addiction to the writing process itself, and maybe take this however you want to, but people could talk about what motivated you to write about addiction, particularly what choices you faced in the writing process, what you learned, other things. It could be crafty, it could be just more about the why. I mean, I'll start very briefly. I'll say, so I told my story basically up until the point where I got a little bit comfortable with the identity of being somebody in recovery. I was clear that I was an alcoholic, that I had addiction, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I had spent my life doing neuroscience research. I had more recently transitioned to the more applied and translational side of things, where I was doing bioethics and work on informed consent and some of the social and legal and broader societal meanings of mental illness. And I thought maybe I could apply some of that to addiction. And Judy, I resonate so much with what you said. I thought maybe I could solve it. I don't know. Neuroscience can't solve it in 2010. So maybe I can solve it if I go to philosophy, literature, humanities, and all the rest. And I also didn't solve it, I'm sorry to report, but I set out looking for some sort of book about About the question I had for myself, which is, if science can't crack this nut today in terms of the identity of addiction, in terms of making sense of addiction, what it actually means, especially if addiction seems so culturally contingent and it varies across times and places and according to experiences, how do we make sense of that? And so I started looking into the history and the philosophy and the intellectual and cultural history primarily of addiction. But I included my personal narrative, and that was a big choice for me. It was a question of how much to put in, why am I putting in memoir, how much memoir, what does the memoir ultimately do? And really the point of the memoir for me was to keep me honest as an academic and as somebody who has a tendency to go very abstract, to keep it very grounded in basic human questions. Who cares? Why does this matter? How does this answer a question for my life about how I make sense about addiction? So that's the thing that brought me here today. I wrote this book. It's called The Urge: Our History of Addiction. Andy sent you the link very nicely. And it's been a trip. It's been a trip talking to people about it and meeting folks and talking across all these wonderful domains. So how about the rest of you? What motivated you to write about addiction? What was the writing experience like? What was the why? Anyone struck by this?
I'll start it again. For me, where I was in the year 2008 was, like the title of my book, I was basically in hiding, but I was also living this very big life, this very social life, where I was somewhere every day, where, doing things that I would normally do, and then coming home at night and eating as many pills as I could and washing them down with vodka and trying to figure out how to balance this addiction with this very big life that I was leading. And there was no way, of course. And as I mentioned, my marriage was ending. And, the only thing that was bigger than my addiction was my desire to be in my children's lives. And I felt like that was threatened. And so I didn't graduate from high school. I never went to college. The way I've learned anything that I've ever learned is through reading books. I've been a voracious reader since I was 4 years old, and writer. Like, I've always written, always read. And I discreetly tried to comb the bookstores looking for a book, maybe written about a Black woman, by a Black woman like me, going through similar circumstances, grappling with addiction, going through a divorce. And I couldn't find any. And then so I started having to ask the booksellers, do you have any books that cover these subjects? And I was humiliated to have to even bring it up, because I just wanted to go find it. There were plenty of books written by white women on these subjects, but I didn't see any written by Black women. And then as I said, I went to treatment and I got sober, and I kept writing and I kept writing. And I did not want to write about this. I didn't want to write about this 10-month period of my life where my addiction got so bad that I almost lost everything and damaged a lot of people in the process, like I mentioned. But every time I tried to write, it felt like it just kept demanding to be written about. It would appear in the morning. It would be like words I'd have to get out of the way before I could get to writing the stuff I wanted to write. And I finally just succumbed, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write about this. And I started looking for comps, and this was in 2019, 2020. Comps meaning books like mine that were out there in this genre that is now called Quitlit, which is QUITLIT, which is literature that helps you look at your relationship with drugs and alcohol. And I found the exact same thing as I did in 2008. No books written by Black women that were on these shelves for me to, access. There obviously are books that were written by Black women on addiction, but they're not on the bestseller lists. They're not current. They're not in the top 100 books. So they aren't displayed. You have to order them if you want them. And I was furious that, X amount of years later, I was still confronted by the same issue. So it seemed very obvious to me that I needed to write Stash My Life in Hiding, not just for me, but for all the women who were going to come after me, and hopefully be able to discreetly comb the shelves of a bookstore and find a book written by a Black woman that deals with privilege, but also deals with relationships. Maybe written by, maybe they're a mom too, maybe they're not, it doesn't matter. But so they could find themselves. I have so many things that people could connect to, so many different identities. And the idea is that they can find one way to connect with me because of all my different identities. And, I connect it with books written by white women and white men. Augustin Burroughs was one of my favorite authors ever. But I never fully found myself in a story before. And this includes television and movies. Like, I've not seen my story on a screen. I've not read about it in a book. And I think in this era where we are, in this age where addiction is so prevalent and people are dying, people are dying everywhere, but more people are dying of addiction, either directly or indirectly, either by suicide or because of overdoses or drunk driving accidents. And I can't believe it's not inclusive, the literature that addresses it. I can't believe it. So I was thrilled when my agent was able to sell my manuscript to Simon & Schuster, and they were so enthusiastic about it, and they published it this year. And it's doing okay. It's doing okay. And I'm just going to see where it goes, but I'm going to keep writing things that aren't out there so that other people can find themselves.
That's wonderful. Let me jump in briefly and say, Linda in the chat says, I love that author. She loved Burroughs, and it makes perfect sense to me, Laura. I hadn't made the connection, but your memoir is very Burroughsian. And it makes me think that when I was in rehab, actually, we were not allowed to read Burroughs. People had they had these sort of underground copies of Lit, but they said it would be a bad influence if you read it during treatment. I went to sort of a hardcore rehab, but that was very beautiful.
That's
Thank you for
funny.
sharing.
I love
Don't you think?
Burroughsian. That's what I'm going to call myself.
But so, and I wanted to say that specifically also, thank you for putting comments and questions in the chat. I see some questions coming in. Folks, please ask questions. We can't promise that we'll get to every single one, but I'd love to see your questions, and we'll certainly take them with us out of this wonderful session. Who's next? Jane, it looks like you've unmuted. Do you want to talk about writing?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of really just thank Laura for sharing that. And I really, in a different way, felt very similar in terms of like, I couldn't find, someone on the bookshelf who looked like me, who had a similar experience to me. And part of the incredible surprise, I suppose, of publishing the memoir is a lot of people coming up to me and sharing their own stories. And I almost feel like that was a big reason as to why I wrote this memoir. And it's so interesting too. I also have 2 books of poems prior to the memoir. And in those books of poems, I don't really talk about it. I see this question about, transparency and in the chat too. And I think I was still struggling with, I think in my earlier work, like, oh, well, that's not, that's something maybe I'll explore later, or I just, maybe I was still working through a lot of the shame around it. And even thinking about like, what does it mean to be like ready to speak about, what is such a huge part of your life and your family's life. And so it was for me a big moment, I think, to kind of like really just say like, you know what, I'm going to tell this story, and I'm going to do it kind of from my like younger self. I feel in many ways I was writing the memoir for myself, as a teenager, as a kid, as a current adult. And I think that in many ways, like that was the real reason as to why I did it. I also feel like it was really important for me to feel really less alone. I think in writing this, I hadn't really done research actually on like, what is this connection between gambling addiction and my community? And it was kind of like a big awakening, I think, when I was starting to look at it. And it really happens, I think, maybe as a poet and maybe as somebody who always kind of goes into the personal, in these tiny, tiny moments that would happen to me. So for instance, like in Seattle, we have a grocery store, Wajimaya, and that's kind of where the casino buses pick up. This is like Chinatown International District, and to go to the Snoqualmie Casino. And it was one of those moments where people were going on the casino bus, and I just had this moment. It was like, that's my father. Like I thought it was him. I actually moved closer to the bus, almost kind of like dad. And it was like the seed of that moment where that man turned and looked at me as if I could be his daughter, that I was like, wow, like, okay, there's something here. There's something very visceral in terms of that, like desire to kind of see my story also within everyone else's story and try to figure out like what is going on here. And I can't be the only one. So yeah, I think and I think poetry really helps me write through it, at least in terms of like what it means to have written this book in a maybe more lyrical way for me, is to try to find that emotional relationship too, in addition to some of the research, in terms of like, how does it viscerally feel, to have, my father, gamble all night long without eating. Really, he wasn't even eating when he was in the casino. He was barely sleeping. He was just there at the table the whole night long, and also trying to hold the truth of my mom's story and what she had to do in terms of like taking care of our family while he was gone. And so there's a lot there, but I think that for me at least, I do feel this I do feel like glad that I'm able to tell this story, I suppose, in a way that hopefully has other people wanting to share their own stories. Specifically, as an Asian American woman, I feel like it is something really important for me to do for the community. So yeah.
I'll go since I'm last about this. And I still feel kind of torn about the whole thing. I became a basic scientist, so I was doing my research and writing scientific papers, from the basement of a biology building that no one was reading, and learning the literature. At the same time, I was practicing a program and being changed and working, with and through other people like me. So I kind of had these two, lives. And I think I'm naturally very mechanistic. So I just wanted to fix it. I wanted to understand the molecules and the genes, and it was kind of timely, neuroscience and all that. And then literally one day, well, before that, this is going to sound weird, but I was at my desk one day and the whole table of contents and the title of the book, Never Enough, popped into my head, which I thought, well, that's weird. I wrote it on a yellow tab, and then I put it up on a shelf and forgot about it. And then I wanted to take a sabbatical, and I didn't want to be in the basement of the biology building again for my sabbatical. I wanted to be somewhere more exotic, and I needed a reason for my dean. And so it popped into my head, I'm going to write a book, even though I knew very well, and I still feel this way, even though I just spent last year trying to write another one, that I'm not much of a book writer. I'm not kind of the long haul girl. I'm the shortcut queen. I do a couple of experiments, get it out the door, check that box. But I wanted to go away, so it was really selfish. And I also was frustrated by so many of us dying. And I do want to come back to this thing about privilege, because the reason I had the opportunity to go to treatment and then a halfway house and then go to school is all because of my position. That had nothing to do with me. It was really just gratuitous. So I I could kind of see that, but I also was a teacher, and I felt like this was, a way to get to Italy in this case, and have something to do, and maybe give back in a way that would have more impact. And I guess I just realized that what I was doing in the lab wasn't having a big impact. And but I'm a terrible writer. I really, it's torture. It's so hard for me to get out of my own way, and tedious and frustrating. And I'll just, cut to the chase, because it eventually got done, kind of mostly because my husband was like, "Where's that book you had to go to Italy to write?" And my dean. So right before it came out, maybe like 3 weeks, I had a moment of panic, because I knew that I had to include some of my own story, and that was very much, I had the same experience as Laura. Like, it was easy to write some things, but not really to dig deep and explain it in black and white. But I knew that I had to do that. And then I'm very good at sort of putting my head down. I just wrote it and then got it off. And then 3 weeks before it was going to come out, it came to my head, oh my gosh, people might read this. And then what? Because I didn't really, people I worked with and knew in town knew I didn't drink, but I think they just thought I was boring. No, maybe. So and then I thought, well, no one's going to read it anyway. It'll be okay. I'll just, put my head back down and forget about it. But that has really opened up a lot. And it is still hard to be vulnerable. And it is still, I'm so grateful for being kind of led that way, because it's enabled me to be connected to so many people. I mean, I guess I came the long way to that realization that vulnerability is where it's at. But I admire people who, choose to write for a vocation. And I feel like like most things in my life, I come to them the hard way. I'm not so wise or generous. I just, I think it sort of unfolds that way. So now I feel like, because of the opportunities for connecting and having an impact, that I'm, eager to try to do more. Plus, I'm in the, latter part of my career. I just turned 60, so I might as well say it all before I'm under the ground, Won't be long.
Judy, you're much too modest. It is wise and helpful, and it's wonderful how our selfish impulses can be harnessed to a useful purpose. And it's nice to go on residencies, and it's nice to do things, but it's also so rewarding to put work out in the world, and to that's a key message of many different recovery communities, is that by helping others, that's how people heal, that we heal through interconnection. And that's one of the things I really respect about work like this. It's been such a great conversation. I'm keeping a sort of side eye on the chat here, and there's a question that dovetails nicely with one thing I really wanted to make sure we had time to cover, and then maybe we can. I think it might be a nice question to end with, and then we'll take some times for the other questions. But just in the little time we have remaining, people are asking about how you get free. What's the way out? How do you work with your pain? How do you get out of addiction, or at least how do you get through it? And of course, it's the biggest question. Here's a funny little twist that can put our panelists on the spot a little bit, maybe, that I like to ask is, what's a recent experience of healing and or recovery you've had? Something that's not in the book, something you haven't talked about. Anything that you'd like to share about, even something you're working on now, if it's not too intimate, or a recent past victory. Doesn't have to be that deep.
I don't usually like to go first, but I can see I can hardly sit in my chair. First of all, that's a great question. And I think several people kind of hit on that. And I wish I knew. I mean, I am practicing that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have the chance. And the book that I've been working on lately is just called Using, and Why Not Take Drugs. And I think it is to kind of get at some of the questions about how we are never have had more opportunities for polishing or escaping reality, or changing it or evading it, but never has there been more of a need for showing up. And it's I mean, as a runner, it's so hard to show up. I can't, I can totally relate to this, but I'll give an example just because that, and then I'll pass because I'm sure there's a lot to say. I have raised 3 kids, and my youngest, who's now 21, just turned 21, when she was the teenager, and this happened with all of them, they were just terrible. Like I didn't like them. I didn't like being with them. I didn't want to parent them. I kind of just wanted to, anyway, I'm letting it all hang out here, but it was rough. And they didn't like me either, probably. But I got this great advice, and I'm just going to pass it on. It was just to try to be curious, which is a useful tool, and also to just be there. So as a result, I would say to my youngest, we're just going to be in the room together. You don't have to talk to me, but I'm going to be with you here. And I would just sit there, and she wanted to go in her room and close the door, and I wanted to go in mine, and close the door, but we wouldn't. We would sit on the couch, and she would scowl, and she would huff and puff and be on her phone, and I would kind of be sitting there, and once in a while, and more frequently, she would say, something weird happened at school today, or what do you think of this? The TikTok thing or something. And I think just by being together, like me being willing to sit there and look at her and me, there was like a massive bridge. So I think what it takes to be free is the willingness to be present. And I only know that, again, the hard way, because I'm so naturally inclined not to be present. But it is the key, I think. And I'm grateful to live long enough to maybe beginning to realize that.
I love that. I love the idea that that's so simple. Judy, what you're describing, just sitting, and simple, what I've learned, especially, in the last decade or so, isn't always easy, but it can just be simple. Like, it doesn't have to be family therapy. It doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be going. It could just be sitting in a room and then having the patience to wait. And I love, when I was in treatment, one of the things I kept saying is listen with curiosity and generosity. Listen with curiosity and generosity. I hated it then. I hated everything they told me. I did not like being in treatment. But I stayed, and, then I got out and I went into recovery. And Carl, to answer your question, I think the story that has come up for me recently, that ties into my recovery, and is, I have a friend, a dear friend, like a sister. She and I have been in each other's lives for 30 years. And after I got sober, I made what's called an amends to her. Like, I went to her and I had really investigated what I had done that might have harmed her. And I came to her and I had written it down, and I read it to her. And a couple years later, she broke up with me as like a friend. We had something minor happen. I thought it was ridiculous, and she stopped speaking to me. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was pissed. I was so angry at her for taking her friendship away from me. And then I did some more work, and I realized that one of the things I didn't come to her with as in a way of an amends or an apology was taking myself out of her life the way that I did when I was in my addiction, because I had completely removed myself from her. She had no idea that anything was going on. And I probably had said something about it, but I didn't go to her and say, I know this hurt you and I'm really sorry. So I waited for an opportunity to do that because she wasn't speaking to me. I was very Jonesy about it, like got to text her, got to call her, got to fix this. Like it felt like it was bubbling up inside me, and I didn't know how to make that go away. And eventually it was years. It was a couple of years before she spoke to me again. And we got on a good track. I was able to make that amends to her, and I meant it, and I was genuine and I was thorough. What I found is that I was disingenuine so often. I was really performative a lot when I was using and drinking. And it was my way of protecting myself. And so what I've learned to do in sobriety is to say no, to not pretend to like something when I don't, to not say I'll be there when I don't have any intention of going, to not say I'm 5 minutes away when I haven't left the house. These are the things that keep me from needing something. And when I need something, I know exactly how long it takes to hit my bloodstream. I know what it feels like. I know what, so I can't need that thing, or I can, but I choose to set my life up so I don't. But the end of my story is she broke up with me again. This is now years later, this spring, again, over something minor. And for me, instead of feeling that Jonesy feeling, got to fix this, I knew I was clean. I didn't owe her anything. I didn't know what had happened. I desperately I missed her. I love her. And I would have loved to fix it, but I didn't think that was within my power. And I knew that it wasn't something that I hadn't addressed. So I was able to move forward. And that's like how my recovery works in my life. I wouldn't have anticipated that I wouldn't react like a jilted lover. I just went forward with my life. I wished her nothing but well. I wasn't pissed. I was confused. But, and a few weeks ago, she came back to me and made an incredible amends. But even if she hadn't, I was able to live in balance with or without her because of that not having red in my ledger. There isn't anybody that I turn around my cart in the grocery store to avoid anymore. And that used to be a lot of people. And that's really what is important for me in my recovery. So.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Jane, what would you like to share?
I just want to thank you for that, Laura. I think especially relationships are probably the most difficult in all of this. And there's so many different types of relationships that are involved, right? Have it be work, have it be family, have it be friendship in particular. And I was thinking about this in terms of just, especially as I was writing the memoir, I'm estranged from my father, but there was a lot, I think, in kind of writing the book where I had so much love and care, and I don't know, a desire still for reconciliation with him. The title chapter ends with me with him being 90 years old, and we're holding hands, strolling the boardwalk together in Atlantic City. And I still have that desire. And, it's really hard when you're working through so much grief and loss. And at the end of my book tour during the summer, I was deciding whether or not to do a reading in Atlantic City because, kind of in part, that's where the book is set. And in many ways, it felt like a haunted place for me and my mother. And, my mom and I wanted to come with me actually to Atlantic City to do the reading with me. And the organization, which is a nonprofit that really celebrates like young writers, mighty writers is what it's called. They put us up in the Tropicana Casino Hotel. So we were in a casino, like there was no way to avoid it. And I guess the moment that really surprised me, was that at first we were just kind of like, this place feels so heavy to us because we hadn't been there in 25 years. And my mom and I, it was really my mom who was like, you know what, Jane, like we have to make this place different for us. And she basically, I'm, 39, and my mom basically was like, here's a bunch of dollar bills. If you want to go play all the boardwalk games that they never let you play, because she was not in a place when I was younger to take care of us in that way, like she just was like angry and upset, and she was holding so much because, there's also a history of domestic violence between, my father and my mother. And I can forgive my father for what has happened to our family, but I can't forgive necessarily the domestic violence that occurred in my family between my father and my mother. But this moment where my mom was just like, go play all the games. And so here I am with her playing the claw game. And I even gambled for the first time. That was really shocking to me. I played the slot machine. I lost $5. And then I was like, okay. And then I ran away. Like, I was like, I needed to, like, I don't know, there was some sort of weird like desire to kind of rewrite this space. That was totally unexpected. I was not prepared to even be in Atlantic City. But it was a totally different place to me when I returned. And I think it was in part trying to heal also my relationship with my mother, I think, at the time as well. So relationships are always complicated in it. And I don't, still I'm seeing in the chat too, like, being in recovery and being in programs for, care, they're expensive. And, I come from a low income family, and my father is unemployed, and, he's not in recovery mostly because he can't afford to be. And so I think about that all the time too. And we've been talking a lot about privilege this hour too. And I do want to recognize that it is something that is always on my mind. And even, when I was back in New Jersey, when I was watching, I think it was like Hulu or something, and there were ads that were being played. And in the ads between, the TV show would be like an ad for a casino and then an ad for a gambling addiction help at the same exact time. And I'm still kind of like, I don't know if there's no necessarily answer for how to be free necessarily, in terms of also what it means to have this happen to a family member of mine. But it is something that is definitely systemic, and something larger than just us. But there is absolutely, obviously from what Laura, Judy, and Carl have shared, there are personal, ways and communities to connect with that can lead to that, being free of that, especially that, systemic hold, I suppose. It's always there, unfortunately. Okay, I'll stop there, but I just want to share that very surprising. I would have never expected to be in Atlantic City again, but.
Carl, I just want to jump in for a moment because I do have a question. First, I want to say how beautiful this conversation is. We've talked about vulnerability. Jill in the chat talked about the need for more transparency on these conversations. You're bringing that here, so thank you for that. There's also so much beauty in the chat, people supporting one another, issues about how horrible our healthcare system is and that there's no support, and Laura's willing to step up and help out Clem. Thank you. My question maybe isn't as juicy as some other ones that have preceded it, but I think it's important because this session is Let's Learn, and this series in general is about addiction and harmful habits. So I'd be curious to know from some of you where you see the differences are primarily between what's an addiction and what's a harmful habit. Is it a spectrum? I'd love to hear a bit about that. And maybe I'd turn it to the two more sciencey folks here, Judy and Carl. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Andy. And thank you for organizing this panel. I mean, just curating and bringing us all together is such a special thing. I'm grateful to be here. I'll just say briefly from both a scientific, from a clinical psychiatric standpoint, but also based on some of my historical and philosophical research, that I came in to my own project, writing about addiction, researching the history of addiction, really curious about this notion of us versus them. It's a huge topic in the philosophy and conceptual work on psychiatry and neuroscience right now. What is a mental disorder? Where do we draw the line? There's been a shift from a categorical view where mental disorders are these need-bounded essential things. You either have the thing or you don't have a thing, toward more of a dimensional view. And this is really a ripe and powerful moment in the way we conceptualize mental health. I came in with the idea that there was us and them. And that relates very deeply to systems of oppression and the way drug laws, for example, have been weaponized to harm people across a huge variety of backgrounds, but especially urban Black people in the United States. So there's a very complicated legacy about that sort of binary view of addiction. And what I would say is that both the science and the historical records suggest a more broad, capacious understanding of addiction, that we didn't used to think of it that way, that going back to, say, the 1500s, 1600s, even the word addiction was not a disease. It wasn't even a status. It wasn't even a thing that happened to you. It was something that you did, and anybody could engage in the action of addiction. So I think that notion that there's an us versus them, and oh, if I have this disease, then that's a big problem, that really stands in the way of a lot of people's recovery. I think it's a double-edged sword. You know, for some people, it's something to cling on to. It's a sort of life raft that gives some clarity, but it probably harms more people than it helps in 2023, is my perspective. And just softening the idea of that binary and accepting the notion that addiction is in all of us, I think, is a very helpful way of thinking about that question. But I don't know, Judy, if you have other thoughts.
I'll be really quick. I couldn't agree more. I'm teaching general psych at the moment and was just talking about this yesterday. And when I learned about mental illnesses, including addiction, I learned they were, you're either sick or well. And that is not borne out by the evidence at all. I think we all have the capacity, all of us, and we're, increasingly susceptible as a result of social and cultural influences. I also think that we can tell whether our behavior is problematic or not by just a really simple question. And this works for me. Is it something that is separating me from myself or bringing me closer? And I know I see people all the time who are compulsively scrolling through social media or playing mindless games. And I think it's a form of trying to medicate us to distance from ourselves. So I think all addiction is separating and all recovery is connecting.
So I'd like to maybe look at some of these other questions too. And Andy, if you have other suggestions for questions, but I also do want to say the people have shared some beautiful things in the chat about resources and otherwise. And I just want to put in a plug for the other panelists. Jane I saw teaches classes on writing. Laura has a podcast. Judy has public talks and all the rest. So please, I have a podcast myself. Like, people are out there putting out really beautiful content. There's a lot of really useful public information about addiction out there. And I think that's also an answer to some of the questions that were asked about how to break free. Just keep trying, find the thing that works for you, and experiment with different versions of recovery and varieties of recovery. Does anyone, that was me stalling for time while Andy feeds me a question, or does anybody else have the questions they want to pull out from the chat? Or maybe the other panelists, or other final thoughts? We've got 5 minutes here, and I'd love to hear from you. What do you think is most alive right now?
That was a good stall. It felt very natural to the conversation.
Well, it was real too. I wasn't lying.
Yeah.
To your recent comment, I don't want to be dishonest. I don't want to have to turn the cart the wrong way in the grocery store.
Yes. Yes. Just the non-sciencey weigh in on addiction versus overindulgence, maybe. That Jonesy thing that I described when I wanted to get my friend back in my good graces and reconnect with her, when that thing comes up for me, I'm usually in trouble of some kind. To some degree, I'm usually in trouble. And, you know, my former father-in-law drinks 4 to 5 large martinis every day. He starts a cocktail hour, which gets earlier every day. And he goes until he goes to sleep. And, you know, I don't think he grapples with addiction. I don't think he's an alcoholic. I think he's just a heavy drinker. He doesn't suffer any dire consequences as a result. It seems for him to be more of a connector than anything. But my addiction kept me very, very apart, you know, to Judy's point. I was further and further away from the person that I wanted to be every time I indulged. Every time I took a pill or took a drink, I grew further away from the person I wanted to be. And so far, in fact, I didn't even know who myself was, because I had to pretend to be all these different things in order to keep my addiction a secret and to keep drinking and using. I had this story about going shopping after I got sober and putting milk in the cart and realizing that no one drinks milk in my house, that this was something that I had just bought because I thought it was what mom should buy. And then I was like, well, what do I want? And I burst into tears because I didn't know what I wanted. I had no idea what I wanted to buy at the grocery store. I had grown that far apart from myself. And my entire journey in sobriety has been growing closer to myself. So again, to like what Judy said, anything that separates me from that, or that gives me that Jonesy feeling, I know that it needs to be further examined. And I have the space and the tools and the option now to do that without indulging. And I haven't always, you know, it wasn't always the case.
Yeah, beautifully said. In some forms of mindfulness-based contemplative psychotherapy, people talk about towards moves and away moves. Am I moving toward my higher self, my values, the vision of who I want to be? Am I moving away? And we're always making toward and away moves for sure. Andy fed me a great question, and I think it'd be the perfect sort of rapid fire round for our panelists to close and to say goodbye. Jill's question was, do you like yourselves today? And can you appreciate aspects of yourself pre-recovery too? And I'll start. I'll take the moderator's prerogative and start. I also got the chance to go away for a fun little residency, and I read through my old journals in a easy chair in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, and that was the most painful part about writing the memoir. Was the memoir portions of my book was confronting the scared, sad, isolated, deluded boy that I was, and there was a lot of self-hatred and shame there for a long time. And it was a process of exploring that helped me to write the book. It gave me the clarity to think that it would be useful to write the book, and to move forward with more self-compassion. So I do like myself today, and I really have compassion. Not only do I like myself today, I like that boy, and I didn't like that boy before. I didn't like that boy when I was that boy. And there was a long time that I continued to dislike that boy. So I do like myself today. It's a great question.
I'm gonna jump in because I have students waiting across the quad, but it's a hard question to answer in a minute. Yes, I do. And it could be another hour and a half. I grew up with such a deep sense of shame. And then I kind of added to that. And so it has been a long, slow journey full of, getting all the resources I could. But I can tell, because I used to look at myself in the mirror and just feel either ashamed or loathing. And now I look at myself and kind of feel like, good for you, one more day. pushing through. So yes.
I'll pop in. I would like to say that I do like all my selves today. I'll say that plural. I feel like there's so many parts of myself that don't get a lot of love sometimes. And sometimes those parts of myself that feel a little afraid. So I'm feeling like I really love all my selves today, in particular. And if anything, I also want to say that I like or love my future selves too. I don't know what's coming ahead necessarily, but in the healing process, in this process of loss and grief, like I believe in that future self or selves as well. And I want to hold my future self very tender. So
I love that selves plural. That definitely resonates with me. I think I like myself a lot. My boyfriend's going out of town for a couple of days, and I'm so excited to spend time with myself, just me. Like, I love my own company. And I know that there was a time where I would try to fill hours when it was just me with other stuff, so I wouldn't have to be confronted with it. But now it's it's fun. Like, I'm my own best friend, honestly. And I'm also, that cloak of shame that I wore for so long is on the floor in another room somewhere. And so I don't have that to contend with. So yes, I definitely do.
Well, on behalf of everyone here, I'm going to say that I think we all like the four of you a lot as well. So I want to validate all of that. Really, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined, who participated in the chat with all your wonderful questions and comments and resources. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording and links to all of your wonderful books. And I just want to give another plug for everyone to register for next week's session in particular. Carl, you mentioned mindfulness. This is a great opportunity for everyone to experience some of this. We have Hugh Byrne, who's a wonderful meditation teacher who will lead a workshop with us. So join us for that. Also, again, a plug to consider donating to Reimagine. The link is in the chat. And I wish everyone a wonderful rest of your day and your week. And I hope to see all of you next Wednesday. Once again, kudos to Carl and Laura and Judy and Jane. Thanks to everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.